What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown. The Federal Reserve is about to start selling shares of ETFs, bond ETFs, that it has purchased through its secondary market corporate credit facility. So we're going to talk about what that means. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so if you don't remember, over the course of 2020, the Federal Reserve was buying bonds, and not just the regular government bonds, the treasuries that they normally buy, and not just the normal mortgage-backed securities that they normally buy. They began buying corporate bonds, meaning that they were indirectly creating new money that was going into the system specifically to lend money to create more debt for corporations. Now, the idea behind this was to soften the economic blow, to make sure that there was no deflationary debt spiral or defaults rolling across the country, bankruptcies, anything like that, to make sure that any corporation who wanted to could get their hands on debt. Because we remember the relationship between bond prices and bond interest rates or debt interest rates, they're inversely correlated. If the price of a bond goes up, that means the interest rate is going to go down. And so with the Federal Reserve creating new dollars, flooding them into the economy to buy bonds, that pushes up the price, that pushes interest rates down. That means that during a hard time, when corporations who are already over leveraged are scrounging around trying to get their hands on new money because maybe earnings or revenues have gone down because nobody's spending money, they can get new debt at cheaper prices in order to continue kicking that can down the road a little bit longer. Now, we have to remember that the Federal Reserve is not allowed, by law, they cannot buy ETFs, they cannot buy stocks, they cannot buy corporate bonds. That's why when you look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, the only thing on their balance sheet is bonds by the US government and mortgage-backed securities. And so I know you're asking the question right now, well, you just said that they've been buying these, so how do they buy them if they're not allowed to buy them? The Federal Reserve set up what is called special purpose vehicles that are housed at the Treasury Department of the United States. Now, what's going on here with special purpose vehicles held at the Treasury is exactly the same thing as a 19-year-old who hands cash to his 21-year-old buddy and sends his 21-year-old buddy into the liquor store to buy beer for him. The 19-year-old can't go buy the beer, but he really did buy the beer because he just gave the money to somebody else to go buy it for him. Same thing happening here. The Federal Reserve gives money to the Treasury so that these special accounts, these special purpose vehicles that the Treasury set up, can go out and buy things from the market that the Federal Reserve isn't legally allowed to buy. Now, this specific special purpose vehicle held at the Treasury was called the Secondary Market Corporate Credit Facility. And the purpose of this one was to go out into the market, into the secondary market, and purchase corporate debt. Now, specifically secondary market here, this means if a corporation went out and wanted to raise new debt and borrow new money, they couldn't borrow directly from the Treasury and definitely not the Federal Reserve. They'd have to borrow that money from somebody else. But it does mean that whoever lent that corporation money could instantly then turn around. That creates a bond. When somebody loans money to a corporation, that's a corporate bond. They could take that and they could sell that because that bond is now already created. So when that bond gets sold, that's a sale on the secondary market. And the Treasury can buy that through this special purpose vehicle. And not only actual bonds, but also ETFs. And these weren't equity ETFs, but they were bond ETFs. And so there are plenty of bond ETFs out there like BOND and BND, just broad market ETFs that instead of holding stocks, they hold a massive basket of bonds. And so that was a strategy the Federal Reserve used in order to try and broadly disperse money throughout the bond markets, the debt markets, was by buying broad baskets of bonds and specifically shares of bond ETFs. But now that has all come to an end, and on June 7th, they are going to start selling the ETF shares that they purchased. Now, obviously, sales are going to be gradual and orderly, which just means that they're going to sell a tiny bit of them at a time to make sure that they don't move the market, because they don't want to start selling this and have the bond market implode, which would have knock-on effects of immediately crashing the stock market. Now, I wouldn't be surprised to see some downward pressure on bond markets, but given the amount of liquidity in the system right now and cash is struggling to find yield and struggling to find a place, I don't think it's going to put that much downward pressure on bond markets. Now, it's not yet selling any of its actual individual bond holdings, just the ETF shares. The Fed said that later on on this summer, they will announce when they are going to start selling the actual individual bonds themselves. For now, they're just selling the ETF shares. So in summary, the Federal Reserve on June 7th is going to start selling shares of bond ETFs that it purchased from March to December of 2020. This has the possibility of crashing the markets if they somehow accidentally overdo it, flood the market with sales, crashing the bond and equity markets together. But I don't think that that is a major concern here. It's technically a possibility. I just don't think it's a major concern here. I also think it's a good thing that they're starting to sell. I don't think the Federal Reserve or the Treasury or the government has any business whatsoever owning any corporate debt, owning any equities, which they don't, but other countries' central banks do, coming into financial markets to try and stop crashes or rescue the economy. And so any sales right now I view as a good sign, even if it does put downward pressure on markets, because that's technically something that should have then happened already that they're just now allowing to happen. But there's another part of me that understands that this is only temporary, and the first sign of trouble, they'll stop and reverse course, and are potentially even doing this just to give them leeway to reverse course and do it more in the future, just like they did with quantitative tightening. The only reason they were doing that and raising rates was so that they had the capability to drop them back down to zero once they needed to. And lastly, I believe wholeheartedly that the reason the Federal Reserve is engaged in these shenanigans in the first place is because only 40% of you are subscribed. So do the country a favor, hit that subscribe button and share the video with somebody you know would enjoy it. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day.